mysterious. Well, happy freaking New Year. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I've been out for a few weeks. Hope y'all had a happy holiday season. I got a couple good stories for you today. But before we get into it, I just want to say I really appreciate y'all. And if you wouldn't mind, hit that subscribe button for me. And where's everybody watching from? I always love seeing where everybody's watching from down in the comments. Well, let's get into our first story of the day. This one comes to us from George Marcroft, a resident of Long Island, New York. He begins, in 1986, I was the lead mechanic on a pro drag racing team. We toured the country, hitting every major event we could during the racing season. The car's owner was a wealthy dude who paid us well, and I was quite happy with the team overall at the time. One night, during a meet in Florida, while having a couple brews with some of the other racing teams, I made the acquaintance of a cat from Louisiana by the name of Lucas Rawlins. It was he, by the way, who specified the letter T in his name. Lucas T. Rawlins. Aside from the fact that he was missing 50% of his teeth and was proud of it, he was a crack mechanic, and we hit it off from the get-go. After we had consumed several beverages, he started to tell me what he did in his off-season, for kicks and for cash. Among other things, he said he collected venomous snakes for laboratories who extracted the venom in order to make antivenom. This antivenom was used in helping those who may have been bitten themselves by one of these nasty little suckers, but the craziest thing about it was this. He said he catches them by hand. Now, when he said this, I thought that his brain had turned to powder after 3 beers. But he was dead serious. He added, "If you're ever in my neighborhood, look me up and I'll show you a good time." Well, that was one of the most crazy-ass things which I had ever heard in my entire life. It was a couple years later that, for whatever reason, I had been thinking about Lucas T. and his invite. I decided to give him a ring. As soon as he picked up the phone and I had said hello, he knew immediately who it was. The very first thing he said to me was, "So, when are you planning to be here?" 6 weeks later, after all the arrangements had been made, I was at his house. That very night, Lucas took me out into the bayou in his 20-foot aluminum boat. We were hunting for snakes with spotlights on the sides of the riverbank, and immediately I was questioning my own sanity for this. If he had been bit out here and died, I had no idea where he'd taken us or how to get back. For that matter, we were out in the middle of a swamp in the dark, and I had no idea how we got to where we were. That night, he caught 6 snakes, and he told me that he had orders for 20 more, to which he added, "Tomorrow's another day." This dude was being paid a ridiculous amount of money for these little snakes, and catching them by hand, he did. Now, whether he was telling the truth or not is anyone's guess, but he told me he'd been bit a couple times and it didn't kill him. He even said that one time he actually driven himself to the hospital with the boat on the trailer because he wasn't feeling that well after being bitten. The next night, we went out again. This time, I was paying close attention to exactly where and when he had turned, along with everything else he was doing. while driving the boat into the bayou. I felt better having done so, and I honestly believed that I could get us back out if something happened. When we got into what I would call the tributaries, he would kill the gas and turn on the electric motor. This allowed him to quietly creep up on the snakes and grab them before they had a chance to take off. He was grabbing some of them right out of the water as they swam. When he felt he was in an area where there may be a snake, he turned the floodlight on. In between, he left the light off. The boat under electric power was silent. We were too, when suddenly the silence was broken by the sound of a large splash, followed by the sounds of something thrashing about in the water just around the bend ahead of us. Our eyes were now fixed on the darkness ahead of the boat. As we rounded the next bend, Lucas flipped the light on, which was a 1,000,000 candle-powered spotlight. And what we saw was remarkable. Standing in the shallows, holding a 6-foot-long alligator, was a 10-plus-foot-tall Bigfoot. It looked right at us and grimaced. Taking one stride with the gator in his hand, it stepped out of the river and was gone. As it exited, going into the woods, we could hear virtually nothing. For all we knew, it was standing on the bank, but we weren't going to look. When we saw it, the gator was already limp in its hands, so who knows how he killed it so quickly. The Bigfoot was only 20 yards away, and he was lit up like a Christmas tree by the light when Lucas turned it on. It was easily wider at the shoulders than the boat we were in, which had a beam of some 6 feet. Its face was gray and wrinkled, and the skin on both its legs and chest was visible through the hair. It had to have been easily 1,000 pounds, which may very well be a low estimate. Whatever its weight was, it was huge and terrifying to see. All that I could think about now was this thing leaping out of the trees and landing in our boat in the darkness to kill us. Thankfully, Lucas was as freaked out as I was, started the motor, and we left immediately. He told me that he had heard tales of them, but in all the time he'd spent in the swamp, he had never seen one for himself. 3 days later, I was gone, and I will never forget my time with Lucas, the snake collector, in the bayous of Louisiana. Wow, a 10-foot Bigfoot in Louisiana? Aren't they usually smaller in the South? What do y'all think of that one? Can you imagine the look on their faces when they came around the corner and flipped the light on? I'd probably need a new set of drawers. Well, let's get into our next one. This one comes to us from Kenny out of California. On August 15th of 2002, my family and I took our camper up into the canyon for a week of rest and relaxation. My truck is an F650 diesel, which was slightly modified to tow the largest camper that I could get my hands on. I also had a custom-built set of aluminum detachable stairs made, which made it easier to get in and out of the camper's rear door. Not that it means anything to anyone, but I have $165,000 invested into this truck and camper setup. We were up in the sticks, enjoying the time, when on the second night, my daughter woke the whole crew with a loud, "Oh!" As soon as I opened my eyes, I said to her, "What's wrong?" She said, "I'm not sure. I was sleeping and for some reason I woke up. And when I did, I swore that something was grinning at me through the window. And no sooner did I think that, it was gone." I said to her, "What did whatever you saw look like?" She said, "All that I saw was a big, wide grin, which looked like a carved pumpkin, and then it was gone." That was when I said, "Ooh." Now, the fire was still going outside, and my son and I grabbed the flashlights, and I grabbed my pistol. We stepped outside to have a look around. There was nothing that we saw. And so we threw some more logs on the fire and went back inside the camper. I told my daughter that maybe it was some type of residual dream or something. Having no idea what a residual dream would be, but it sounded smart at the time. The following day, while we were making lunch, cooking franks and beans on the fire, we started to hear what sounded like several owls hooting up a storm in the woods. The sounds were coming from several different directions, but then all of them had stopped shortly after we were done cooking and eating. My son had commented that he didn't think owls were around during the day. My wife followed in suit, saying that they were in fact nocturnal. Frankly, I didn't know one way or the other, but I listened to what they both had to say. That afternoon, it started to drizzle, but we went out for a walk anyway, wearing our ponchos. When we had returned to the campsite, my wife noticed that 2 of our chairs were missing. As we looked all around the site for the chairs, the reality was that, in fact, 2 of our folding chairs were gone. Now, when I use the term campsite, I'm referring to the place where we had parked. We were alone in the middle of nowhere. As far as we knew, there was nobody else around. We hadn't seen or heard anything except for the owls. Nevertheless, we were wet and tired, so we hung up our rain gear on some hooks, which I had installed on the back of the camper, and went inside. Nightfall was fast approaching, and we were deeply troubled, not knowing who or what was wandering around unseen by us that had taken our chairs. My wife and daughter were already saying that they wanted to get out of here, but I told them that I was exhausted and that we would have to leave in the morning. It was about 10:30. My daughter was reading up on the upper bunk while 3 of us were playing cards. Suddenly, something slammed into the side of the camper. It had hit the camper so hard that some of the interior trim popped off the wall. My wife screamed, and my daughter started to cry. This camper had been modified, as well as the rear of my cab, so that I could step through a small hatch into the truck. I passed through the hatch and started the truck. As soon as it was running, the truck started to rock back and forth violently, to the point where I thought it was going to flip over. The girls and my son were being tossed about in the camper, slamming back and forth against the walls, while my own head was already slammed into the window several times. At some point, my eyes caught a glimpse in the West Coast mirrors of a huge creature that was leaning against the side of the truck. It had to be enormous because I could only see from its waist down. As I was looking down the side of the truck was still rocking as I slammed it into gear and punched it, sending my wife and children flying into the back of the camper. The only thing I could think of was getting out of there fast. The path out was not terrible, but it wasn't good either. As I punched the truck and had moved maybe 100 feet, 2 final crashing blows resounded against the back of the camper, which sounded like I was hit with the trunk of a tree. Everyone was crying and screaming. As my son made his way up to the cab, I asked if everyone was okay, and besides being roughed up a bit, everyone was in fact all right. When we had cleared the woods, making it out onto the main road, I let out a sigh of relief. And my son said to me, "Dad, what the heck was that?" I told him that the girls and I believed I saw a Bigfoot in the side mirror of the truck. On the trip back, everyone had fallen asleep, and I just kept driving, not caring if I ever slept again, with my only thought being that of getting everyone back home safely. Having made it back to the house in 7 hours, I woke everyone up. They all staggered into the house, and I asked my wife to make me some coffee while I stayed outside to do an inspection of the truck and assess whatever damage had been done to it. The roof and side panels of the camper had separated from each other, apparently where this beast had been grabbing it. On the rear of the camper, where the 2 final blows had landed, there were 2 large indentations. One was on the right rear, and the other was right on the seam where the door met the frame, both being about 8 inches deep. It looked as though 2 boulders had slammed into the rear of the camper. The camper was totaled by the insurance company, and when I told the agent what happened, he just shook his head in disbelief. Well, dang. I don't know if I'd have told the insurance agent that a Bigfoot beat up their camper. He'd have probably canceled their policy and laughed, saying, "You got some kind of sense if you think you're going to pull off insurance fraud like that." Well, that sounded like a pretty wild ride if you ask me. Have y'all had a Bigfoot encounter or anything mysterious happen to you? Shoot me an email at cryptidmysterious@gmail.com. I would love to hear about it. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Appreciate y'all.